So really a wonderful
Lois says she's trying to log on.
Who?
Lois.
Lois. Okay. So we'll
So
either
why
way.
do we have to suffer? I'm just kidding.
Right, let's go ahead.
Right. So so here we are. It's exciting. It's the start of a new year. And even though in a sense we are going to cover familiar ground, but as we've talked about the cyclical nature of life in general, especially in Yiddishkeit, one shouldn't think of themselves on in a circle, coming right back to the point that they were at a year ago. Like it's the old joke that I've said a few times, where a certain rabbi is giving the Parsha talk, the Dvar Torah in Shul on the Shabbat Parshat Vayeshev, which is the story of the Yosef and his brothers. And he sits there and he tells the story of how Yosef goes and he's betrayed by his brothers and they sell him as a slave down to Egypt. And there's a woman in the in the shul that just hears this and is so moved emotionally about it, she starts to weep for Yosef. And the rabbi, if he had to admit to himself, he kind of feels pretty good about himself. He brought somebody to that kind of a level of emotion. So the next year comes Parshat Vayeshev again, and he's already anticipating he's going to give a drasha, and she's going to be so moved. So he starts, and he goes in, and she's sitting there, as they say in Hebrew, adish kapatish. She's not affected. She's sitting there stoic, cold, and maybe I'm not selling the story enough. He thinks it. So he really goes and he lays it on heavy, how Yosef is begging his brothers to spare them, and the brothers just turn a cold eye to him, and he's really laying out the story, and she not affected. He finally gives up and he just finishes his drush, and afterwards he goes over to her and he says, Mrs. Feldman, I can't help but notice that you connected with the story differently than last year. Last year you were really moved and you felt for Yosef so much, and that brought you to tears, and this year, nothing. She said, listen, last year he didn't see it coming. And when he says his brothers blindsided him and sold him downriver, and it's heartbreaking. This year, if he didn't learn his lesson from last year, then he's a shlomazel. I have no pity for him.
That's funny.
Hey.
The thing
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yosef
Right.
isn't for a few weeks yet.
Correct. But the point is, here we are at Bereshis again. We're at the first parsha of the Torah. We are about to embark, but to a certain degree, are we not just kind of coming right back full circle? And the answer is no. Our understanding always has to be that even as we come back to the parshas that we've already revisited and we have studied numerous times, that the cyclical nature is an upward spiral, coming back to the same general point, but not at the same place. We have to take everything that we learned and everything that we've done and everything that we experienced over the course of these past years and build on it. And that has to be our attitude. How is this Bereshit, the study of this Bereshit, going to be more than last year? And that's actually a little bit of the theme of what I want to talk about in this parsha. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. First famous verse of the Torah, one of the most famous words of the Torah is the very first word, Bereshit. And the reason that it's Bereshit is because the Torah decided to name the Torah, the first parsha, after the Israeli space program. Right?
Yeah, very funny.
But we are so familiar with this word, and yet there is so many mysteries. First of all, it is interesting that the first letter of the Torah should be the second letter of the alphabet. Right?
Right. It should be Aleph. Yeah.
If we're really that close, find a way to make the first letter an A. find the way to make the first letter an aleph, big, grand letter. In fact, the first letter is embellished. If you actually open up a Torah scroll, we know most letters have to be of an exact and even font size. The Torah is very exact in the way we write it. The columns are perfectly even. The letters are all even. The exact way we make the letters. If you're seeing a Torah inside is really a masterwork in calligraphy in the sense that it looks printed, because each letter is very exact. All the aleph look the same, all the bets look the same, etc., etc., and each one of them has a very specific way and how you have to make it. It takes many years of study to become a sofer. But there are rare occasions where deliberately the letters are slightly larger or slightly smaller. One of the cases of a slightly smaller letter, anybody offhand knows a place of a slightly smaller letter?
Yeah, the curses.
It was a good thought, but actually, not off the top of my head, I don't know that in the curses there are smaller letters, but the aleph, final letter of the word Vayikra, which starts the third book, Vayikra, that God is calling out to Moshe. The aleph of Vayikra is small, and that's actually to underscore Moshe's humbleness. The idea that God should be calling out to him. He was uncomfortable writing that, even though it was true that that was the factual representation of that moment. Moshe was bothered writing that word. That God was calling out, God was seeking him out. And so he makes the aleph small so that when at first glance the word looks like Vayikar, and God happened upon him. And God appreciated Moshe's humbleness, so much so that the 2 extra drops of ink, the Midrash tells us, that Moshe did not use in writing full-sized aleph, God bestowed that heavenly ink right here, right? And Moshe's face shone, which led a certain non-Jewish, speaking about Italy, an Italian sculptor, to depict Moshe with
Horns,
horns. And ever since,
braids.
unfortunately, right, because the word is kikaran or Pnei Moshe, that Moshe's face shone with light, except that the word karan does have the same root word as the word for horn, because a horn is a projection, right? A protrusion, right? Not just of animalistic horn-rimmed glasses. The horn of Africa means a projection, a protrusion. So it does come from the same root word, except that that's where vowels are very important. The word is not kikeret, that there was a horns on top of Moshe's head, but rather karan, or light was shining from Moshe. Either way, that was a small aleph. Here we start with a big bet. The first letter in the Torah is big, is large, and it's a bet, and it's not an aleph. Now I'm going to tell you, not only is that a letter choice, but it actually is accurate in depicting the context of that first word as well. Bet is not the first letter, it's the second letter. And this moment, believe it or not, was not the beginning of the process. Notice that it says be, because be, also the prefix bet, means what?
In.
In, or in the midst of. Not at, but in. In the midst of the beginning, which would connote what?
That something helped happen beforehand.
Ah, this wasn't the point of origin. This was in the midst of the process. Vayihi or, as it were, was not the beginning of the process. And that is very important information, very impactful information. This is not just important from a historical point. This is very much important from a philosophical and from a theological, from in a sense, our takeaway from this. What does this mean? That this that we're about to talk about was not the beginning, but it was in the midst of the beginning.
Well, this is a book. The Torah is for us, for humans. So when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, it's the day that humans were brought to earth, not the day that everything began. So in a sense, this is the part of the process that we should be interested in.
Yeah, yes, 100%. But just to play devil's advocate, we don't open up with the sixth day of creation. We open up with the first one, which would seem to imply that more than just human. This is not just a Torah to human beings, but it's kind of the Torah of all of the universe, right? Which is what the angels' argument was in keeping the Torah in heaven. And they were
Right.
created on earlier days of creation. But more importantly, even day one is not considered the first day of creation. That's what we're saying.
Well,
Even
aren't
if
there,
that is
Right.
aren't there, I know nothing about Kabbalah, but I'm going to just throw this out there. Aren't there other universes, other worlds that existed already? Is that in with this at all?
so the answer is none of us are know anything about Kabbalah, and that's the first thing about Kabbalah that anybody has to know. In fact, that's in the word Kabbalah, which means that you've just received some,
Received it, right?
right? Nobody's a master of this because Kabbalah delves into the infinite, right? And for anybody to claim they're a master of it, as by the way, is true about claiming that you're a master of any type of Torah. As we said, the way we refer to a scholar of Torah is a Talmid Chacham, which means what?
A
Wise
smart
student.
student.
A wise student,
Right.
right? And that's so important. That's so important to remember that at best we are trying to be a smart and knowledgeable student. But you are correct, and in fact, that's where I'm headed. But we have to understand something important. We engage in a lot of anthropomorphisms.
But the Bible does too.
Yeah, correct. And we get the license from the Torah, as Jerry just said. Um, Anthropomorphisms means we will use words that are inherently incorrect, not because we're trying to deliberately get it wrong, but because we have to use language that makes sense to us, that we can relate to, and trying to be able to properly understand um, uh, uh, things that otherwise are not really defined by any rubric that we have and that we could comprehend. So we use the best possible metaphor, which is why, for example, when God turns to the prophets and say, "What do you see?" and he says, "I see a flowering stick," or "I see a golden menorah," or whatever it is, and then God says, "You have seen well," right? Is God saying, "I'm very impressed with your spiritual vision. You have 20/20. You don't need glasses"? What's God saying? You have seen well. The answer is because they're not seeing, God's not projecting into their minds an image of a menorah or the image of a flowering staff. They are being, a concept, an idea is being downloaded into their mind, and they are finding the proper way to elucidate this otherwise, to manifest, to define this otherwise ephemeral and intangible concept. And part of the job of the prophet is not only to receive the download, but to absorb it correctly and to find the proper way of of understanding understanding it and giving it a vehicle of a metaphor. And God is saying, "Well done, you have properly understood that which I am trying to give over to you." That metaphor is apt. That metaphor is one that captures the essence of what I'm trying to give you, but understand that it is, at the end of the day, only a metaphor. Now, when we say worlds, right, the expression you just used,
Mhm.
Paula, that that there are worlds that preceded this. If in your mind you're picturing some sort of planet or even some sort of universe, then you're not wrong. But you have to understand that it's a metaphor. It wasn't planets or universe. There was realms, a, a, a ecosystem of a concept, as it were, right? An entire concept. But it wasn't a world like we see a world. We are the physical, right? And the way it's manifested in the world that we see is a physical world. But things exist, like, right, I have a whole world in my mind, right? There isn't actually a world there that's taking up space, any physical space. It's, again, when I say a world in my mind, I'm speaking metaphorically. And so if using the word realm helps kind of remove the strictures of the metaphor, then perhaps a realm, the word realm is a better term, because what we are trying to say is that prior to this world, there was already many steps to the process. There are many stages of this process, each one in a sense its own fully defined ecosystem. When God said "Vayihi or," that was already multiple steps down the line, and that's important. Why? Because that's the way you do it too.
Right, we visualize. Is that what you mean? Like
What do we visualize? What
in our mind, we have we visualize what the concept is, and can be many different people that
in
visualize
what? In the pursuit of what? And this is the point.
of the concept of what he's trying to say, or what somebody's trying to use a metaphor for.
Right, but I'm saying as far as God, not in our trying to understand Him. This is for many steps in God's process. What would have preceded Vayihi or? So now that you know, this is in the midst of the origin process, but it's not the point of origin itself. It's not the very first step in the process. Steps preceded it. If I just stated that to you, tell me what is your hypothesis as to what comes before Vayihi or?
Mhm.
And why is it so important to us? Who cares? Doesn't affect me, right? The answer is, first of all, it does affect you,
Yeah,
Yeah.
not only practically, but also, as we said, philosophically.
right.
Where I thought you were going, and maybe, Diane, this is where you're going with this a little bit. The difference between this being the first step or there being steps before it is whether this is intentional, a deliberate creation, or just kind of a casual spur of the moment thing. We often do actions that are the first step of the process, right? But how would you define that kind of action?
Conceptual planning.
No, I'm saying if it's the first step, if the action is the first step of the process, what do we call that? What do we call that kind of action?
I guess that would be the unintentional.
That's an unintentional act. Why? Because what didn't precede it?
The intention, the picture in your mind, the visualization, as Diane was saying.
But that's not how God works.
Exactly.
Oh.
That's the point. And that's exactly what God wants you to understand from the get-go. This
it's all
world
intentional.
is not unintentional.
Right. I was going to say that I tried to say the same thing, Paula, that that's not the way God works, but I was muted for some reason.
That was
So
not
I'll yell.
intentional.
So I'll yell. Okay.
Jerry, the beauty was not intentional. But the This is so key, more key than we think. This world is not unintentional. Our reality is not unintentional. Our reality is on purpose. Our reality is intentional. You know who doesn't believe this? Well, you know who claims they don't believe this? Pretty much everybody.
You know what, though?
Don't make me
Rabbi,
answer that question.
I mean, I think about this a lot, actually. You know, if you're suffering and you feel like you're having unjustified suffering, or if somebody you love or somebody you know about is having unjustified suffering, it's very hard for you to think about the fact that God intended that specifically. And
Well,
you
man,
know that. I mean, it goes without saying.
Gary, you're going way far down. You're like, we're at the beginning. We're at Bereshit. You're going way too far along the process. Let's back up. We're not there yet. We're nowhere near there yet. We have to go back to the very kind of the foundational concept before we start
But
thinking.
I would, you know, I agree that God doesn't do anything.
No, but let me flesh it out, because there's a lot to unpack in just that point. Because it's not just about God. When the principle and of an intentional world underpins everything in Judaism. Everything in Jewish philosophy is built on the foundation that God didn't just create the world, but he created the world intentionally. Why?
Because of us.
But because if God created the world, then what do I owe God?
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. If God created the world unintentionally, what do you owe God?
Nothing.
Still everything. He's your creator. He's your creator. You owe it. You owe it because he created you. Because
It's like it's like honoring a bad parent. It's like you still have to honor the parent.
But I'm not even, yes, but I'm even talking about not even from an emotional standpoint. I'm talking about simply what could God demand of you? He could demand of you anything. Well, let me put it to you this way. If God created you unintentionally, what do you owe him? Anything. Anything he would ask of you. He would be in his right to ask anything because you have nothing that's not his.
I think you owe him thanks. And that's something we can do that the rest of creation can't do.
Right. But again, but I'm saying not what we currently owe him. We're going through a thought experiment here.
Okay.
If God created us unintentionally, then what will we owe him? The answer is anything he asks us.
I get
Anything
it.
he asks us.
Right.
Because everything that we have is his. So anything he would ask. But you know what we don't owe him? We don't owe him everything. We owe him anything. Why? Because he created us unintentionally. So I can mind my own business and he can mind his own business. And I can just go about my life, living my life however I want. If he comes calling and he says, by the way, I want this, we give him that because he has the right. By right, he has the right to ask for anything from us, and we would have to say yes. And this is not even emotionally or practically. This is simply by right. It would be entirely within God's right, the purveyor of everything that we have, to ask us for anything. What is the difference between anything and everything? It's about how active I get in giving. I can be passive. Why? Because unintentional creation means almost that I'm here passively.
Oh.
I'm here unintentionally. God, okay, created, boom, there, and puzzle pieces and whatever fell into, everything just is whatever scattered, whatever.
But
So many of us.
doesn't that deny God?
No, that's just denying our perception of our specific. I'm saying again, we're getting in the thought exercise. If God just created unintentionally, just dropped a whole bunch of things, right? Then we would owe anything. We would owe to God whatever he would demand, because it would all be his. But if God created us intentionally, if God created us on purpose, then what does that mean? That God created us for a purpose.
Right.
That's a whole different relationship. That demands of us that we wake up in the morning and we ask ourselves, why am I here?
Mhm.
Why did God create me? If God created unintentionally, then the answer to that question is he didn't create you for a reason. He was just like, we do this all the time, sitting on the phone, whatever it is, and I'm doodling or I'm tearing up a piece of paper and somebody said, why you do that? What's your answer? No reason. But the action wasn't how God started the process. God didn't just begin this process by acting. He began the process by planning, by having an intent, having a purpose, having realms of steps came prior to the Vayihi Or. There was planning to this world. So things that are in this world exist for a reason. That's what Bereshit tells us. That's what that big bet tells us. That big bet changes the entire paradigm. Not only did God create the world, but he created the world on purpose. It didn't start with Vayihi Or, it started with planning. And God thought this through and decided what was going to be and then made it happen. And so everything in creation owes it to God, not just to be ready to hand over to him anything when he comes calling, but rather for you to pursue your calling. Why did God make me? And importantly, why I say that this is such a philosophically important point, how many people wake up in the morning with the sense of saying, what am I meant to do today? Not what am I going to do today? What am I meant to do today? What is my purpose? What am I meant to fill my time with? How am I part of the great grand scheme that God put into motion even before he said Vayihi Or? How do I fit into this? What is my role? What is my place? And because that's the way God created the world, that answers so many questions about human nature. And we've talked about this in the past, also around Parshat Bereshit, because a lot of this are ideas that we've already, in a sense, engaged in and talked slightly about in earlier go-arounds of this parsha, which is the fact that a human being does not feel satisfied with a life simply of being the end user, right? Where my general attitude about things is it's all here. I'm the recipient. I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to indulge whatever I can get my hands on. That's not, and I'm not a bad person, so that doesn't come at the expense of somebody else. Whatever I can get on my hands on and indulge in and enjoy, that's what life's about. And somehow, innately, deep down at our core, and it bubbles up to the surface quite often, there is no satisfaction in living a life like that. As I say often, that when I spoke with a whole bunch of teenagers, not religious teenagers, not those that were indoctrinated in these ideas, but those simply going with their gut and asking them, how long could you sit around, even if somebody would pay you a top dollar, to sit around just sitting on your couch, watching your favorite TV show? A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. How long could you go? 2 years, 3 years, 10 years? Out doing anything productive, just indulging and not having to worry about money or anything like that. How long could you do that? And what was surprising is that these kids, without having any religious doctrine ingrained in their head, none of them said over a month. Not one. which means that it's built into our core psyche. Something
Meaning our need for purpose?
that if the world was created on purpose, that means that the world was created for purpose, which means that a person that has a consciousness and ability to think and think critically in a way that animals cannot, are going to eventually ask themselves, what am I doing here? Or more importantly, why am I doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't take a scholar, it doesn't take a philosopher, it doesn't take a religious person. Every human being, sometimes it's buried under so many layers of the social paradigm that they're not even aware as to what their discomfort and dissatisfaction is a result of. But any one of them that takes a time to really kind of explore their own nature, realizes the truth of this, that true satisfaction doesn't come with the big steak or the big house, the nice car. That's why Mark Twain said a line, and everybody agrees with him: money doesn't buy happiness. If money is the medium to acquire stuff, physical assets, experiences, etc., then why, in theory, can money not buy happiness? It should be able to, because happiness is a result of true satisfaction. Satisfaction is a result of what? Of not accumulating stuff and indulgences and experiences. It's the result of finding purpose, because it's hardwired into your very creation and creation of all of existence. And if you look around all of creation, you see this. You see this hardwired into creation, from the blade of grass to the tree to the ants to viral germs. Every one of them exists with purpose. A germ is all about its purpose, everything that it does. A tree is all about its purpose. Its purpose is, as God gave it at the moment of creation, to perpetuate. And so a tree blossoms and holds out its branches and its leaves to collect the resources of the earth, the nutrients in the ground through its roots, and the sun uh, uh, through its leaves, and then it spreads off seeds, and the seeds more trees. And same as with animals, with their mating and their process of a salmon swimming upstream, or the pilgrimage of the penguins, or whatever type of particular germs and mutating in the way that will make the transmission of themselves the most viable. All this is existing with purpose. All of this. There is nothing in creation other than the human being, because a human being has free will.
Right. I was thinking about that.
Other than a human being, everything else exists with purpose, because everything was created on purpose, with purpose. And the human being at the epicenter of that purpose,
Yay.
as the drivers of that purpose. But God did not make the human being an automaton. Like, to a certain degree, God made all the rest of creations. You don't see a crab deciding, you know what, I want to be a cat today, right?
Rabbi, I once freaked out an entire congregation of people at a synagogue by talking about what you're saying, and then saying all of a sudden, so how do you explain a suicide bomber?
Misguided.
And like the rabbi and the whole place went like crazy. Like they just went silent. And I said, there's a guy who just like found himself like crushed up on a mountain, and the only way that he could get out was to slice off his own arm. Do you remember that several years ago?
Yes.
I said, look at the will to live, look at the will to survive and to perpetuate. How do you explain a suicide bomber?
Because a human being has a perception of a layer deeper, which is not just to exist. Human beings, you see, all the rest of the creation, their purpose is to exist, and their existence, it's in a sense why you see a cyclical and a hamster wheel esque nature to it. They exist with purpose, and their purpose is to exist. Their
Right.
entire existence is just to perpetuate their existence.
Right.
Right? They're not into having experience, making memories, or anything like that. Right? It's
Well, sometimes talking about that, sometimes people feel it's to be,
Oh,
like a
but right,
suicide.
well, right. But I'm saying, but a human being is different. Everything else, and this is why we call Rosh Hashanah the day that God created mankind rather than the moment, because everything else, their existence, their raison d'etre is just to exist. They are backdrops to the play, and a backdrop, its purpose is to exist, right? To exist as the backdrop. And so that's what we see the nature of all other things. A human being's purpose is not just to exist. It's rather to drive the purpose of existence. Why did God create the world to begin with? He had intent. And that search, man's search for meaning, right? Viktor
Right.
Frankl,
I was thinking about Viktor Frankl.
that is innate. That's what does Viktor Frankl say? He's not coming at purely from a religious side. He's not writing a religious book. He's writing a book on psychiatry. He's saying that the only thing that really fulfills a purpose is discovery of meaning, which is why searching for meaning is the ultimate search, not for pleasure, not for happiness, not for security, because the proof of that is all the people that become soldiers, you give up security and go into a job that is hellaciously dangerous. Why do you do that? So clearly the highest thing on the hierarchy is not security, right? It's not perpetuation. What is it? It's meaning. It's meaning. And the suicide bomber is a
He's
tragic
looking for
story,
meaning.
is a tragic story of misguided search for meaning.
Right.
But there's so much that's misguided. I mean, I wasn't going to go where Jerry went. I was going to suggest the scenario, which is too contemporary, too much around today, too prevalent. Your house is burning, your apartment building is burning, you're outside, you remember that your cat is inside, you go inside, you want to save your cat, you hear a baby screaming, and you continue to get the cat. This is what drives me crazy.
Right. Now, and I think again, because all of this is, look, the fact that a person has the innate search for meaning because it's built into a system doesn't mean that we're all going to be perfect practitioners of this. Because again, our minds are incredibly complex, plenty of distractions. You can be married to the love of your life and you end up divorcing.
So
Because layers of reality and misguidedness and messiness, whatever it is, end up getting in the way. Which is why, as I say, wait, it should be easy, right? A relationship, if this is the love of my life, it should be easy. This should be the happily ever after. No, happily ever after is ludicrous. The word's a lot messier than happily ever after, and you're a lot messier than happily ever after. When you're going to meet your bashert, and the person who is the love of your life, you're going to argue, you're going to fight, there's going to be times where you can't believe, why am I married to you? Right? And both sides are going to say this, et cetera, et cetera. That, and people are going to make mistakes just because somebody has the innate understanding deep down at the core of their consciousness that life's about purpose doesn't mean they're going to be aware that that's what that search, that discomfort, that spilk is about. B, even if they're aware that it is purpose, they're not necessarily going to know what purpose. And that's the point of the Torah, the guidebook. But the Torah makes a point in clarifying what this is by that big bet. The Torah immediately makes a point and clarifies what it's doing here. Why do we need the Torah? You need the Torah because the world was created intentionally. The world was created for purpose, and you were created for purpose. And if you're saying, how the heck do I know what that is? That's why I'm here, says the Torah. This is so fundamental. And this is going to go through the entire Torah, but and more specifically through the entire story narrative, the cherry-picked stories, right, that the Torah chooses to share with us. There was 10 generations from Adam to Noach. How much do we know about generations 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9?
Right.
Basically nothing. What? Nothing
Right.
happened. Many things happened. Don't forget, they spanned thousands of years. Why does the Torah not share their stories? Because Torah is not a history book. Torah is going to share the stories that clarify for us, crystallize for us the lessons and the instructions that we need in our pursuit of divine purpose. So the next story that the Torah highlights is about what happens when people forget their purpose and how the ramifications of that is not only on themselves, but on all of creation, because as the central catalyst of purpose in existence, when we human beings mess up, it has an effect way beyond just ourselves. Adam and Noach mess up, and the whole Garden of Eden goes kaput, right?
Right.
Why is this story in the Torah? Because it's making that point. You cannot take your eye off the prize. You don't have the right to. You were created for a purpose and for a reason. What do you owe God? Not anything, everything. Because he created you for a reason. What else does the story of Adam and Noach tell us? Adam and Chava tell us? There is rehabilitation. You make a mistake, you don't get blinked out of existence. You get a chance to clean your mess. And guess what? We're still cleaning Adam and Chava's mess. And that's fine. That's fine. God does not necessarily put a time limit on the rehabilitative process. The important thing is to understand Bereshit. God thought of a whole bunch of stuff before he actually started creating. There was intent. This was premeditated. This is a premeditated world. You are a premeditated existence. You're an intentional existence. Are you living your life in that way? Are you living an intentional life? As I've shared often, the philosophical point of one of my teachers, he was not actually the Hasidic professor, as it were. So it was not very common to hear our Talmud teacher wax philosophical. But this particular Talmud teacher would oftentimes wax philosophical right in the middle of the Talmud class. We're learning kind of cut and dry, scenario-based situations. What is the halacha of this? And then every once in a while, he'll kind of just go off on a riff, on a philosophical riff. And he would often turn and say, are you living because you're alive? Or are you living because you haven't been hit by a truck yet? Are you living by accident? Are you living unintentionally? Jerry, unintentionally, your mic's on mute again.
On purpose or by accident? Are you living
Right.
on purpose?
Are you living by accident or are you living on purpose? And living on purpose means living for purpose. Because you can say, what do you mean? I'm living on purpose and it's not about purpose. It's about enjoying and indulging. Oh, really? So let me ask you a question. God put you in this world just to be a dead end? You're a dead end. All roads lead to your indulgence and nothing else comes out of you from the other end. All you are is taking and not giving. So why then would God have created you? what is your contribution? And understand that until you kind of start living life in that way, you're never going to feel content. And it doesn't make a difference how many stakes are there. Now, can you put on a facade, a distraction that allows you to, in a sense, not focus on that underlying discontent? And could you do a really darn good job of distracting yourself in that way? Sure. Could you go through your whole life without realizing that that niggling feeling you had deep down was because you're really not fulfilling the very reason you exist, but you've buried it under so much noise? Can you bury the hum of your soul under such a cacophony of noise that you never end up hearing it? Unfortunately, yes. Can you hear the cacophony? Can you hear the hum of your soul and misunderstand it and take it completely in a wrong direction and end up driving it off a cliff? Also, yes.
I'm taking this very personally. I don't know that that was your intention, but I'm taking this very personally.
I hope personally, but not in a negative way. I
No,
want you to take
wait till you hear what I'm going to say. It's really not talking. It's not in a negative way. And the question that I have is, and very personally, until last Shabbos, when you made your proposition to me, Jerry, you weren't there. There were witnesses.
By the way, just in case that word is misunderstood, proposition, an art proposition.
Oh gosh. Excuse me.
all knew
You are
that.
correct. Lisa, he asked me to do an art project, and I'm thinking about all of the work that I have done prior to this amazing thing, including the Jewish stuff. It was all learning to get to this point.
Wow, Paula.
And the learning, what I'm wondering about in light of what you're saying, Rabbi, is learning has to be its own purpose, doesn't it? Or does
Yes,
it?
yes, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time. What I
Okay,
mean to
fair
say by
enough.
that is that something can achieve two purposes simultaneously. Learning God's Torah is a mitzvah and serves a purpose in purifying the world around us, purifying the air, keeping God's intent, infusing yourself with holiness. All that is a purpose unto itself. And it is
Schal mitzvah,
also
mitzvah.
an instruction manual. Yeah. When I
Mhm.
give money to tzedakah, I'm achieving two things at the same time, more than two, many things, right? I'm giving money to an institution. I'm doing a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah. I'm making the world a better place. I'm elevating all the everything that led to me earning this money, and also helping that organization do whatever it's going to do good with that money. Things can have more than one aspect of purpose. Hillel
Okay.
and Shammai can both be right.
Right.
Right? In our is now sometimes in our kind of one-dimensional world, I have to either do Hillel or Shammai, but it doesn't mean
Uh-huh.
that Shammai's point is not valid as well as Hillel's and has parallel truth to it.
Mhm.
And so yes. Now I am humbled uh, by the perspective that this project is a seminal moment of purpose, and I won't, God forbid, disagree. Obviously, I'm not going to be on the level to say that I can with absolute certainty tell you that the idea I presented is your seminal purpose. Having said that, is it a purpose? Most definitely. God bless.
And the other thing is, what I was writing to some of your colleagues that are friends, the offer to learn with me about what we're going to be producing, that was as important as doing the painting.
It sounds like a great project.
It's the
Yes,
12
yes.
tribes. It's not any secret. There were lots of people around to hear this.
Yes,
Right,
this is
can you
not
talk about it or do you want?
not a top secret project. I just happened to
Right.
come late into the realization that Paula is an incredible artist. It's always been my intent that the shul should be furnished with art that depicts holy concepts, something but that is engaging, whatever it is. And I was kind of thinking about best way to go about it, and it feels like this is a shidduch. This is
Wow.
meant to be. And I think in general we all have a responsibility. This is exactly the case. This is kind of exactly what we're saying. If you wake up with the understanding on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, maybe even once a year, but you come up with there's a moment that you take stock and you say, I am part of the world that God created intentionally. Everything in this world has purpose. Then what is my unique purpose? Because I am the one and only me that has ever been created. With my unique set of talents and my unique circumstance and the situation and the time, that an era, et cetera, et cetera. What is it that I uniquely can contribute? And by the way, there's not only uniquely, but also in the general phrase. Of course, we can all contribute in ways that all of us also contribute, right? Doing mitzvahs that we all do, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's also like, what is going to be my unique contribution toward the effort? First, I have to learn more about the effort. Where is God going with this? What does God want, in fact, from this world that He created? You can't really start exploring your part in it without having a general sense of what it is.
Mhm.
This first letter, really, this first letter of the Torah is the entirety of the Torah. Understanding that this world is created with intent, which means everything has a purpose. And therefore, if everything has a purpose, and the next question is, what is that purpose? What is the big general purpose and what is the specific purpose? Then you're going to need the instruction manual, and that is the Torah. If you open up an IKEA box and assume, oh, this is just metal and wood formed unintentionally in some random shapes, then you're not looking for the instruction manual then. And you're kind of doing whatever you want with whatever you see inside there. And most often, whatever you end up doing will be entirely unsatisfactory. But if you open up that box and say, okay, all these very weird pieces of stuff have purpose. And there's a certain way that each one of these pieces fit. Then the first thing you look for is the instruction manual. What is this supposed to be? What is this supposed to arrive at? What is the goal of this? And then what is each specific thing here's role in this goal? This piece is the facilitator. It's a tool. And this piece is a support, right? Everything, and this brings beauty. This is not really a structural element, it's a beauty element. Everything has its unique role, and the instruction manual is there to help clarify, define, and tell you when and how that specific role is meant to be implemented. And it's all in that first bet. All right, everybody?
Wow.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
That was interesting. Very good.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
Thanks,
Shabbos.
Jerry, for the reminder.
Thank
I
you, Jerry.
appreciate it. Okay, bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
All right, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Bye.
Bye, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.